Everything seemed normal that quiet night in the small town of Red Oak. Carla Summers was home, alone, just like so many other nights. The old house she had inherited from her grandmother had a nostalgic charm that comforted her, but it also brought a melancholic air with its antique furniture and long hallways. The large mirror in the living room, a piece of furniture that had been part of the house for generations, had always been a silent, almost forgotten presence. It was late, and Carla was exhausted, finishing up the final details of a work presentation. Everything was quiet until, as she passed by the mirror in the living room, something caught her attention. A movement. Too quick for her tired eyes to fully grasp. She froze for a moment, turning her gaze to the mirror. Nothing. Just her own reflection. She sighed in relief, chuckling at herself for being startled. But as she got closer, something seemed off. The reflection in the mirror was there, but it wasn't matching her movements. Carla reached out her hand to touch the mirror, and that's when panic gripped her. The reflection was no longer mimicking her. Instead, a male figure, someone she didn't know, was staring back at her with a cold smile. She screamed. The mirror rippled, as if the glass were made of water, and the figure vanished, replaced once again by her pale, trembling reflection. Carla stumbled back, her heart racing, feeling the ground vanish beneath her feet. That smile. Who was that man? And why was he in the reflection, inside her house? Not knowing what to do, she grabbed her phone and called the police. An hour later, Carla was sitting in a cold room at the Red Oak police station, recounting what had happened to Detective Amanda Ross. Amanda was practical, a woman who had seen it all in her career, from homicides to missing persons cases, but Carla's story intrigued her. Reflections that didn't belong to the people standing in front of the mirrors wasn't something she heard every day. As Carla narrated the events, her hands shaking and her voice heavy with panic, Amanda listened closely. Outwardly, the detective remained calm, but something about Carla's story unsettled her. The description of the figure, the smile, there was a strange familiarity that Amanda couldn't shake. However, her skepticism prevailed. "You saw a man's reflection?" Amanda asked, her tone controlled, almost gentle. "Are you sure you were alone in the house?" Carla nodded, her wide eyes clearly expecting disbelief. Amanda knew her job wasn't to feed into the fears of terrified citizens. She dealt in facts, hard evidence, not superstitions. Still, Carla seemed genuinely terrified. After promising Carla that she would investigate the house and file an official report, Amanda ended the interview. Part of her wanted to file the case away as a hallucination caused by exhaustion, but the other part, the curious, insistent part that had driven her to become a detective, pushed her to check the scene herself. That night, Amanda drove to Carla's house. The street was quiet, the city lights beginning to dim, and an eerie feeling hung in the air. Amanda looked at the house, a worn, old building with a certain imposing presence. She approached the door and entered, greeted by the creak of the wooden floors. The living room, the scene of the incident Carla had described, seemed ordinary at first glance, except for the large mirror on the wall. It was impossible to ignore that mirror. Old, with a dark wooden frame, it seemed as if it had been there since the house was built. Amanda watched her own reflection as she cautiously approached. Nothing seemed out of place, except for the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her back. With a sigh, Amanda stepped forward and reached out. She touched the cold surface of the mirror, expecting to feel nothing more than the smooth, harmless touch of glass. And then it happened. 1 second, she was looking at her own reflection, and in the next, another figure appeared. A man. Tall, with harsh features and a smile that sent a chill down Amanda's spine. Time seemed to freeze as she stared, hypnotized by the surreal scene before her eyes. But then, with a blink, the figure was gone. Amanda's reflection was back, just her, alone. She stepped back quickly, her heart pounding. She looked around, trying to rationalize what had just happened. There was no one else in the house. No trace of another person. Just the silence and the darkness that now felt oppressive. The unease inside Amanda grew. Maybe Carla wasn't imagining things after all. Amanda returned to her car that night with her mind racing. The mirror still haunted her thoughts. The face she had seen, the strange and cold smile of that man, the way he vanished, none of it made sense, but something inside her screamed that this wasn't just an illusion. The images were too clear in her mind, and the shiver that ran down her spine wasn't something she could easily ignore. Back at her apartment, she spent the rest of the night trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was exhaustion. A trick of the light. The reflection of something outside, projecting into the glass. She repeated these possibilities in her head like a mantra, but no matter how much she tried to convince herself, she knew it wasn't that simple. The next morning, Amanda decided to revisit the case. She opened the police files, searching for anything, any small detail that might be related to strange reflections, but found nothing. There were no records of similar incidents. That made her think. If Carla wasn't the only one, why were there so few reports? She reached out to Carla again, who seemed even more shaken. Amanda reassured her, explaining that as long as the investigation was ongoing, she would be safe. However, Carla wasn't very convinced. When Amanda arrived at Carla's house, she found the woman paler than before, clearly sleep-deprived, with dark circles under her eyes and trembling hands. Amanda began questioning Carla once more, but this time, her questions were sharper, more precise. She needed to understand better what was happening, and for that, Carla had to provide specific details of that night. Carla started talking, describing the strange feeling she had before seeing the reflection. It was like something was watching me the whole time, but I was alone. Then, when I passed by the mirror, I felt him there. It was real. I wasn't imagining it, she said, her voice trembling. Amanda took notes and, for the first time, began to consider the possibility that this wasn't just an illusion. The more Carla spoke, the more pieces of the puzzle began to form in Amanda's mind. She had investigated numerous cases over the years, but this one was different. It wasn't a missing person or a common crime. It was something darker. That same day, Amanda began to investigate other possible similar cases. She decided to check if anything similar had occurred in neighboring towns, scouring old records and archives. It didn't take long before she found scattered reports of missing persons who had mentioned seeing something strange in mirrors before they disappeared. However, these reports were vague, often dismissed by authorities as the delusions of shocked witnesses. To Amanda, the connections were undeniable. The disappearances had similar patterns. Each person involved had seen strange reflections just days before vanishing without a trace. This sent a chill through Amanda. It was as if she were dealing with something far beyond the usual, something that couldn't be explained easily by logic or reason. Amanda's nights began to grow more disturbed. At home, alone, she avoided mirrors, the discomfort growing each time she accidentally caught her reflection. Even at work, she couldn't shake the unease whenever she passed by a reflective surface. One night, while reviewing some of the files in her office, that presence returned. A cold sensation ran up her spine. She glanced at the mirror down the hallway in the precinct, and for a brief moment, thought she saw someone standing there, watching her. Quickly, she looked away, her heart racing. "It's just exhaustion," she muttered to herself, trying to keep her composure. But the worst was yet to come. A few days later, Amanda decided to return to Carla's house for a second inspection, this time with a more open mind. She couldn't ignore what she had seen, and she needed to understand better what was behind those reflections. When she arrived at the house, Carla was on the verge of hysteria. She confessed that she had seen the man again. This time, he appeared in a smaller mirror in the hallway, while Carla's back was turned. Carla's description was disturbingly familiar. The smile, the posture, everything matched what Amanda had seen. This put Amanda on high alert. If this reflection was real and appearing to both of them, it meant that something was terribly wrong. Amanda swept the house again. This time, she spent longer in front of the large mirror in the living room, waiting for something to happen. Every second felt like an eternity as anxiety built inside her. Her eyes scanned every detail of the reflection, searching for any sign of an anomaly. And then, just as she was about to give up, it happened. In the corner of the mirror, a shadowy figure began to emerge slowly, like it was being pulled from the depths of dark water. It was the same man. The same cold smile. He didn't move, just watched her, but his piercing gaze filled Amanda with an indescribable fear. Amanda stepped back, her heart pounding, but kept her eyes locked on the mirror. She couldn't let him vanish this time. She needed to understand what he was. However, before she could act, the figure disappeared again, as quickly as it had appeared. Breathing heavily, Amanda stepped away from the mirror, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. It was real. Whatever was happening was real, and she was involved in it much more deeply than she had ever imagined. That night, Amanda knew Carla's case wasn't an isolated incident. There was something lurking in the mirrors, something beyond common understanding. And now, Amanda was on its trail, without fully grasping the depth of the danger she was facing. Amanda couldn't shake the image of that man from the mirror out of her mind. Each time her thoughts drifted, he was there. That cold, disturbing smile, the sense that something much larger was at play. She knew she couldn't stop now. Carla wasn't the only one, and Amanda was determined to find out who else had experienced the same thing. Back at the station, she dove into the missing persons records. She needed to understand if other cases could be connected. Hours passed as she sifted through reports, scrutinizing every detail in search of clues. It didn't take long for a few coincidences to emerge. Strange disappearances, people who vanished without a trace, and in all the cases, there were mentions of odd behavior in the days leading up to their disappearance. Comments about weird feelings and inexplicable discomfort in their own homes, and in some cases, fleeting visions in mirrors. The connections between the cases were subtle, but to Amanda, it was clear that something linked these people. She made a preliminary list of disappearances that might be related and started contacting the victims' families. Her first visit was to the home of Jonathan Blake, who had disappeared 2 years earlier. His mother, an older woman worn down by grief, was hesitant to talk at first. Amanda realized that although the case had been classified as a routine missing person, there was much more behind the story. When she finally convinced her to open up, the woman broke down in tears. She revealed that Jonathan had mentioned seeing someone in the mirror of his bedroom a week before he vanished. A man. Tall, smiling. The description matched exactly what Amanda and Carla had seen. After hours of conversation and fragmented details, Amanda left Jonathan's house with the confirmation that she was on the right track. The reflection was present in every case, an invisible thread that no one had noticed before. The more she investigated, the more convinced she became that the man wasn't a coincidence. But the question that haunted her was, who, or what, was he? And why did he appear in these mirrors, only to some, before they vanished forever? Her next investigations led her to other families, where she found similar patterns. Each of the missing individuals had reported seeing the reflection. In some cases, the reflection appeared in large mirrors, like Carla's. In others, it showed up in small pocket mirrors or even the reflection of a window. It didn't matter the size or type of reflective surface, the man appeared, watched, smiled. And soon after, the person disappeared. These stories began to weigh heavily on Amanda. The sense of helplessness grew as she delved deeper into a mystery that defied logic. There was no hard evidence beyond the words of the families, but the connections were too clear to ignore. Every person who had seen the man's reflection was no longer around to tell their story. As the days went on, Amanda's own mind started to close in on the case. Even in moments of rest, the mystery continued spinning in her head. The thought that the next reflection she saw could be her last was always there, although she avoided saying it out loud. Her nights grew worse. The detective started avoiding mirrors as much as possible. Every reflection she passed was scrutinized, hoping not to see that haunting figure staring back at her. There was something unsettling about knowing that someone, or something, could be watching, silently, from the other side of the glass, but doing nothing more than smiling that cold, predatory smile. One night, after a long day of investigations with no clear breakthroughs, Amanda sat at her kitchen table, setting the files aside for a moment. Her head throbbed, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders. She got up to pour herself a glass of water, and as she turned to the sink, she felt it again. That familiar chill running up her spine. She hesitated for a second, knowing that if she looked into the hallway mirror, she might find exactly what she dreaded. But as an investigator, she knew she couldn't let herself be paralyzed by fear. She had to face whatever was coming. Taking a deep breath, she took 2 steps forward and slowly turned her head toward the mirror in the hallway. What she saw was only her own tired reflection, the worn-out expression of someone who was fighting something invisible and unknown. For a moment, relief. Just her. But then, the movement in the background. Almost imperceptible, but real. The figure she feared began to take shape once more in the glass, like a shadow emerging from the depths of darkness. The same man. The same smile. He was there, watching her, as if he had all the time in the world. This time, though, he seemed closer, more defined. And the smile seemed wider, darker. Amanda stood frozen, feeling her blood turn to ice. Time seemed to drag as she kept her eyes locked on the mirror, waiting for the figure to vanish. But the man stayed, motionless, smiling at her, as if he knew something she didn't. Something that terrified her more than any case she had ever worked on. Finally, just like before, the reflection disappeared. The mirror showed only Amanda again, alone, in the empty house. But the fear remained, stronger than ever. That night, Amanda made a decision. She couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Carla wasn't alone, and that man in the mirror was far more than just a terrifying coincidence. She had to find out what he was, why he appeared, and most importantly, what it meant for the people who saw him. Because now, she knew, she was connected to this mystery far more deeply than she had imagined at the start. The nights grew longer for Amanda. Each investigation brought her closer to a truth she still couldn't fully comprehend, but every day made her more aware of the danger looming over her. That man's face was etched into her mind, a reflection that now seemed to follow her everywhere. She avoided mirrors as much as possible. At work, at home, even on the streets, any reflective surface made her heart race, and the feeling of being watched never left her. But she knew that running wouldn't solve anything. Something was happening, and time was running out. Carla continued to reach out to her, more paranoid than ever, reporting that she had seen the man in several mirrors around her house. One night, as Amanda tried to rest, she was awakened by a sound coming from the living room. The apartment was silent, except for that faint, constant noise, like something was scratching the floor. Amanda got up slowly, her mind still clouded by sleep, but her instincts kept her alert. She grabbed her flashlight, feeling the weight of anxiety in her chest as she made her way toward the living room. She didn't expect to find anything other than what she already knew, the mirror in the corner of the room. But something was different now. When she shone the flashlight on the mirror, she saw a shadow. At first, it seemed like a mistake, a trick of the light, but as she got closer, she realized it wasn't an illusion. The figure was there, inside the mirror, an immobile, dark presence. It was him, the man. Amanda froze. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in the silence of the night. The smile was still there, cold and predatory. He didn't move, just watched her, as if he were in complete control of the situation. Amanda wanted to look away, to run out of that room, but something about the reflection kept her frozen. She couldn't move. The mirror seemed to pulse, almost as if it were alive. The figure in the reflection, clearer than ever, slowly approached, but not in the real world. Only in the glass, as if it were behind an invisible curtain. Amanda stepped back, the floor creaking beneath her feet, and the figure stopped. That thing seemed to sense her fear, feeding off it. Amanda didn't know what to do. She was alone, and as experienced an investigator as she was, nothing in her career had prepared her for this. She forced herself to look away, releasing the breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. When she glanced back at the mirror, the reflection was gone. She spent the rest of the night wide awake, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. Something was wrong with those mirrors. They were more than just reflective surfaces. There was a presence, an energy, that went beyond what she could explain. More and more, Amanda felt like she was dealing with something supernatural, something far beyond her control. The next day, she decided to dig deeper. She returned to the precinct, searching through files that might shed light on what was happening. After a few hours, she came across a clue that made her freeze. An old case, classified as an accident, a man who had fallen off a ladder while cleaning a mirror. The only witness, his wife, claimed that he seemed to have been pulled into the mirror before he fell. Amanda had never heard of this case before, but the description was eerily familiar. From that moment on, she knew there was something bigger at play. She started contacting experts, people who dealt with the unexplained, trying to understand if this was some kind of curse or paranormal phenomenon. In one of those conversations, an older woman, an expert in the occult, mentioned an ancient belief: mirrors could be portals to another dimension, a place where trapped spirits or entities lurked, waiting for an opportunity to cross over. This made Amanda feel the weight of the danger she was facing. The reflections weren't just disturbing visions, they were signs of something far more dangerous. She began to wonder if all the victims who had disappeared before Carla were, in some way, trapped in that dimension. The man in the mirror wasn't a hallucination, he was there, watching, waiting, and now he seemed to be getting bolder. That night, while reviewing her notes and preparing for another night of vigilance, Carla called. Her voice was hysterical. She had seen the man again, but this time, he wasn't just in the mirror. Carla swore she saw him on the other side of the door, as if he were trying to cross over into the real world. Amanda tried to calm her down, but she knew that meant the danger was getting closer. Whatever that reflection was, it was trying to escape. Amanda realized that time was running out. Whatever was trapped in those mirrors was gaining strength. And the next step would be crossing over into the real world, where it could cause irreparable damage. But how could she stop something like that? How do you fight against a presence that only exists in reflections? She knew she needed more answers. She needed to understand why that man was trapped in the mirrors, how he got there, and more importantly, how to stop him from escaping. With each passing night, the reflections became more intense, more real, and Amanda knew she was on the edge of something devastating. But the only thing she knew for sure was that if she didn't act soon, she might be the next victim. Amanda woke up that morning with a restless mind. The case of the mirrors, which once seemed like a strange anomaly, was now revealing itself as a real threat, something that was growing more ominous each day. The events weighed heavily on her, each more disturbing than the last. She needed answers, but more than that, she needed time. She knew that if she didn't act soon, the next reflection she saw could be her last. Back at her desk, Amanda stood over the board she had set up in her office, where she had pinned up reports of missing persons and the evidence she had gathered so far. The pattern was clear: every person who had seen the man's reflection ended up disappearing within days. And now, Carla was being tormented again. Amanda knew that Carla's time was running out, and if what Amanda was feeling was true, so was hers. Reviewing the missing person cases, Amanda noticed that each person had seen the reflection between 5 to 7 days before they vanished. This window of time was precise, almost as if it were marked for each victim. It was always the same cycle: the reflection would first appear subtly, just a presence in the background, a distant smile. As the days went by, the reflection became more frequent, more menacing, until the person disappeared, as if they had been pulled into the mirror itself. As she read through the reports, a disturbing thought began to form in Amanda's mind. What if the reflection she had seen, the man who was getting closer and closer, wasn't just a vague threat? What if she herself was marked to disappear? The thought rattled her deeply, but she knew she couldn't ignore it. The frequency with which the man appeared to her, the way he seemed to draw nearer. Amanda was starting to believe that she, too, was caught in the cycle. She grabbed a calendar and began counting the days since the first time she had seen the reflection. The final number sent a chill through her. If the pattern held true, she was now on the 5th day. Exactly when the other victims began losing control over their reality, when the reflection became a constant presence. Amanda knew she had to act fast. She knew Carla was on the verge of a breakdown, and if the cycle followed its course, Carla could vanish at any moment. But Amanda also had to find a way to break this pattern, to stop the same thing from happening to herself. Digging deeper, Amanda revisited old, forgotten cases, analyzing every small detail she might have overlooked before. It was then that she found something that made her blood run cold. One of the victims, just before disappearing, had sketched the reflection they had seen in the mirror. The sketch showed the smiling man, and something more. Amanda leaned in, studying the drawing closely. There, in the background, barely visible, was another reflection. A reflection of herself. The shock hit her like a wave. What did this mean? Amanda couldn't say for sure, but she knew it was a warning. As if the reflection was telling her that she was next. It was as though the man in the mirror had a plan, a well-defined cycle, where each new victim drew in the next. She tried to push the fear aside, but now, more than ever, Amanda knew her own life was at risk. The connection between the cases was undeniable. Whatever was trapped in those mirrors was moving its pieces with precision, and Amanda was just the next in line. Amanda sat at her desk, staring at the sketch of the reflection, trying to grasp the magnitude of the danger she was facing. That man in the mirror wasn't just a warning to others. He seemed to have a purpose, an intent, and now it was clear that Amanda was part of his game. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing moment. She knew she needed answers, but the clues she had weren't enough to fully understand what was happening. That's when she decided to do something she had previously thought unthinkable. She called Alice Boyd, a renowned occult expert who lived in the neighboring city. Alice was known for handling cases no one else could explain. Amanda had always been skeptical of this kind of help, but the circumstances were pushing her beyond the limits of rationality. On the phone, Alice listened intently as Amanda recounted the events. When Amanda finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. The response that came next made Amanda shudder. Mirrors can be portals. That's not superstition, it's reality, Alice said calmly. They can trap souls, but they can also be doors to other dimensions. What you're dealing with isn't just a reflection, it's an entity using the mirrors to hunt. Amanda couldn't hold back her questions. But why? Why now? Why these people? And how can I stop it? Alice took a deep breath before continuing. Mirrors have been used for centuries in rituals and practices involving entrapment. Many cultures believed that when someone dies, their soul could be captured by a mirror if it wasn't covered. What you're describing makes me think that this entity, this man you saw, was trapped a long time ago and has now found a way to get out. Amanda sat in silence for a few moments, trying to process the information. The idea that she was dealing with something so ancient and powerful was terrifying. Is there a way to stop it? She asked, urgency creeping into her voice. Yes, Alice said. But it won't be easy. You'll need to destroy the mirror that's directly connected to this entity. It's using that mirror as a portal, but mirrors are like veils between two worlds. If it's destroyed before the reflection consumes you, you might be able to avoid the fate that's unfolding. Amanda hung up the phone, her mind swirling with what she had learned. Carla's mirror. She knew that was where it had all started, and it was there that it needed to end. That mirror seemed to be the source of everything that had been happening. If she could destroy it, maybe she could save both herself and Carla. Determined to act, Amanda drove to Carla's house later that afternoon. The air was thick with tension, dark clouds gathering overhead as if nature itself sensed what was about to happen. Carla opened the door, looking even more worn than before. Her pale face revealed sleepless nights and a fear that had taken over every part of her life. Amanda explained quickly what she needed to do, but she didn't go into too much detail. Carla was on the edge, and any further talk about portals or entities trapped in mirrors would only push her deeper into panic. Trust me, Amanda said firmly. I know what I'm doing. We need to destroy that mirror. Carla hesitated but saw the seriousness in Amanda's eyes and nodded. The two entered the house, and Amanda headed straight for the living room, where the large mirror still hung, looming and menacing. The old frame seemed darker than before, and the surface of the mirror had a strange gleam, as if it were breathing, pulsing with an energy Amanda could now feel. With a hammer in hand, Amanda approached. Her mind was focused, but her body trembled with adrenaline and fear. She knew that if anything went wrong, it could be the end for both of them. She glanced at Carla, who stood by the door, nervous and silent. The tension in the room was palpable. Amanda raised the hammer, ready to shatter the mirror, but as soon as the hammer touched the cold surface, something began to happen. The reflection in the mirror warped, and the man appeared suddenly, clearer and closer than ever before. He seemed almost real. His smile, wide and threatening, mocked her. The mirror began to vibrate, emitting a low, deep hum that filled the room. Amanda tried to move, but her feet felt glued to the floor. The man's reflection grew closer, his hand nearly touching the surface of the glass, and Amanda knew that if she didn't act fast, he would cross into the real world. With a desperate scream, Amanda summoned all her strength and brought the hammer down hard, shattering the mirror. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the room, and the figure in the reflection fractured into thousands of pieces, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Amanda collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily, as shards of the mirror scattered across the floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Carla stood frozen, staring at the shattered pieces sparkling under the dim light. The mirror was destroyed, and the dark presence had vanished. For now. Amanda knew she had won this battle, but the feeling that it wasn't truly over lingered in the air. The mirror was broken, yes, but the entity that inhabited it, maybe it was still out there, waiting for another chance to return. Amanda remained on her knees, the shards of the mirror scattered around her like fragments of a nightmare she could hardly believe was real. Each breath was accompanied by a tremor. The silence, now deep and unsettling, was interrupted only by the sound of rain beginning to fall outside the house. Carla, leaning against the wall, couldn't take her eyes off the broken pieces of glass, which shimmered faintly under the dim light. The detective stood up, her muscles aching from the tension. For a moment, she wanted to believe it was over. The mirror was destroyed, the man had vanished along with it. But as she looked at the shards on the floor, an uneasy feeling still lingered in her mind. Something didn't feel right. There was no sense of relief, no closure. Instead, the air in the room felt heavy, as if the fight was far from finished. Is it over? Carla asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, filled with uncertainty. Amanda took a deep breath, unsure of what to say. She wanted to reassure Carla, to tell her it was all done, that they were safe now. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still coming. For now, yes, Amanda replied, trying to keep her voice steady. But we need to leave. Carla nodded, quickly gathering her things. Amanda, however, couldn't focus. Her mind was stuck on that reflection, on the smile that seemed to linger even after the mirror had shattered. She knew that things rarely resolved so easily. As they prepared to leave, Amanda felt a slight hum in the air, like a vibration she couldn't see but could feel deep within her bones. The feeling of being watched returned with overwhelming intensity. Almost instinctively, her eyes were drawn to the broken fragments on the floor. That's when she saw it. Tiny movements, almost imperceptible, but real. The pieces of glass were starting to tremble. She stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. One of the larger shards reflected the light in an odd way, distorting the surroundings. The reflection was still there. Not the man's full image, but a part of his face. The smile. "Carla, get out of the house!" Amanda shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Carla looked at her, confused but didn't hesitate. She ran for the door while Amanda, with her breath quickening, tried to comprehend what was happening. The mirror was broken, but the man, the entity, was still there, trapped in the fragments. Somehow, he was still trying to break free. The living room door slammed shut with a loud bang, causing Amanda to turn sharply. The hum in the air grew louder, and the pieces of glass began to vibrate more violently, emitting a high-pitched sound that made Amanda's ears ache. The reflection of the man was growing, expanding across the shards, as though he were reconstructing himself piece by piece. Amanda knew she needed to completely destroy the pieces of glass, but the hammer she'd used was too far away, and her feet felt rooted to the ground by the sheer force of the presence in the room. The shards of glass began sliding across the floor on their own, moving toward the center of the room. Amanda tried to move, but her body was paralyzed with fear. The reflection now stretched across several pieces of glass, each one reflecting part of that sinister face, mocking her with its cold, unyielding smile. In a desperate effort, Amanda finally managed to move. She grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it with all her strength at the shards of glass gathering in the center of the room. The impact was harsh, and many of the pieces shattered into even smaller fragments. The sound echoed through the room, but there was no time for relief. The shards continued to move, as if every smaller piece was still being guided by an unseen force. The figure in the reflection didn't stop growing. Now, Amanda could see the full shape of the man, his presence spreading across each shard, his shadowy form cast upon the walls of the room. The smile was larger, more menacing, and his eyes seemed to pierce through Amanda like sharp blades. The room grew darker, as though his presence was consuming all the light. Amanda frantically looked around, searching for anything, something she could use to stop this. That's when she remembered Alice Boyd's words. Mirrors were portals, yes, but they could also be destroyed completely with fire. If the mirror was broken, but the entity was still trapped within the fragments, the only solution might be to burn them until nothing remained. Amanda rushed to the kitchen, grabbing the first bottle of alcohol she could find. Her hands trembled as she poured the flammable liquid over the shards of glass. Every second felt like an eternity as the hum in the air intensified and the figure of the man continued to grow. With shaky hands, Amanda struck a match and threw it onto the glass. The flames ignited quickly, consuming the shards and the alcohol. The high-pitched sound filling the room began to fade, and Amanda watched as the reflection in the fire flickered. The figure of the man distorted in the flames, his smile and face melting away as the glass began to burn. The fire continued to rage, devouring the remnants of the mirror. Amanda stood in silence, breathing heavily, her eyes locked on the flames. The reflection of the man disappeared slowly, until only ashes and molten fragments remained. When the fire finally died down, the room fell silent. Amanda collapsed to her knees, exhausted, her body still buzzing with adrenaline. There were no more reflections, no more hums. Just the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Carla cautiously returned to the living room, her eyes wide with shock at the sight of what had happened. Amanda, still on the floor, let out a long, shaky breath, trying to process everything. She had done what needed to be done, but the feeling that something was still lurking didn't leave her. The mirror was destroyed. The man in the reflection was gone. But Amanda knew deep down that the evil she had faced might not have been completely vanquished. Maybe it was just waiting for another opportunity to escape. She looked at Carla, who seemed to be in shock but relieved. They stared at each other for a moment, saying nothing. Both knew that something dark had been interrupted that night, but the certainty that it was truly over was still far away. The battle was won, but the unease remained. And Amanda knew that even after everything, mirrors would never just be mirrors again. The sense of relief didn't last long. Amanda and Carla walked out of the house under the light rain, feeling the cold seep through their clothes. The house, now silent, seemed to have been emptied of something dark, but the memories of the recent events still hung heavily over both of them. Amanda tried to push away the nagging feeling that something wasn't right, but deep down, she knew the threat wasn't entirely gone. The days that followed were strange. Carla seemed calmer, as though a heavy cloud had finally lifted from her life. She hadn't seen the man in the mirrors again, nor did she feel the oppressive presence that had haunted her for so long. Amanda, on the other hand, remained on edge. Although she had shattered the mirror and burned the fragments, that eerie smile still crept into her thoughts. The nights became moments of restlessness. Amanda felt the constant sensation of being watched, even in the solitude of her apartment. She avoided looking into mirrors too long, preferring instead to glance at windows to ensure nothing was lurking behind her. But it was difficult to shake the paranoia, that persistent feeling that something was still out of place, that it wasn't really over. That night, as she prepared a cup of tea to calm her nerves, Amanda felt a familiar chill run down her spine. It was subtle, almost like a distant whisper, a silent call. She stopped what she was doing and turned slowly, her eyes drawn to the small mirror hanging on the kitchen wall. The reflection showed only her own image, tired and worn. She stared at herself for a few moments, trying to rationalize the unease she felt. The kitchen was silent, the soft sound of the kettle on the stove the only noise in the room. Her eyes remained fixed on the mirror, finding nothing unusual. But then, a slight movement caught her attention. Something that shouldn't have been there. She blinked quickly, almost not believing what she was seeing. In the reflection, behind her image, there was a shadow. A subtle figure, barely distinguishable, but undeniable. Her body froze, and the air seemed to vanish from the room. The reflection only showed her, but now, there was something else. Small, distant, but real. She took a step back, trying to push away the rising panic. The mirror remained still, its surface clear and cold, but the shadow was there, moving slowly, as if it were part of the darkness that now seemed to seep into the room. Then, the smile appeared again, faint but unmistakable. Amanda felt the floor tremble beneath her feet, the fear consuming her. She knew in that moment that the evil hadn't been defeated. Not completely. The entity had somehow escaped. It was still out there. And now, it was watching her again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of the trance for a moment. She grabbed it quickly, her hands shaking. It was a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, there was only a single photo. An image of herself, reflected in the kitchen mirror. Amanda stared at the photo, the dread growing in her chest. The reflection showed more than just her. There, in the background, was the shadow. The cold, terrifying smile of the man in the mirror. The phone slipped from her hands, the sound of it hitting the floor echoing like a warning bell. The darkness around her seemed to close in tighter and tighter, and Amanda felt the weight of the situation. The mirror had been destroyed, but the dark presence wasn't confined to it anymore. Somehow, it had escaped. It was free. Now she knew. Mirrors would never just be mirrors again. And the man in the reflection, he would never stop watching. Amanda sat in silence, her thoughts racing as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The photo on her phone, the shadow in the background, the smile. It was all too much to take in, too surreal to fully grasp. But deep down, she knew the truth. The man in the reflection was still out there, still watching, waiting for his chance to come through. The mirror had been destroyed, but it hadn't been enough. Somehow, the presence that had haunted Carla, that had haunted her, had escaped. It was no longer bound to the glass. It was free, and it was far from finished. She looked around her apartment, her eyes lingering on every reflective surface. Each mirror, each piece of glass, now felt like a threat, like a potential gateway for the darkness that was stalking her. Amanda knew she couldn't trust anything that showed her reflection. She could no longer trust her own eyes. The man had been clear in his intentions. He wasn't just a figure trapped in the mirror. He was something much older, something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. And now, he was no longer confined. The days passed, but Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Even when she was alone in her apartment, with no one around, she felt his presence. It was subtle at first, a fleeting sense of being observed from just beyond her line of sight. But as time went on, it grew stronger, more insistent. She would catch glimpses of movement in the corners of her vision, shadows that shouldn't be there, reflections that seemed to linger a second too long. No matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the feeling never went away. One evening, while sitting at her kitchen table, Amanda's phone buzzed again. Another message from an unknown number. Her heart raced as she opened it, dreading what she might see. This time, it was a video. A short, grainy clip of her reflection, once again in the mirror. But in the background, barely visible, was the same shadow. The same smile. The man was there, watching her. And he wasn't just in the mirror anymore. He was everywhere. Amanda knew then that there was no escaping him. No matter where she went, no matter how many mirrors she destroyed, he would always find her. The connection between them had been forged, and it couldn't be broken. The entity had been freed from the mirror, but its bond with Amanda remained. He had marked her, and now he was waiting for the right moment to strike. The right moment to pull her into his world. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she realized the full extent of what had happened. The man in the mirror had been using her all along, manipulating her, drawing her deeper into his web. And now that he was free, there was nothing she could do to stop him. He had won. Amanda stood up, her body trembling as she moved toward the bathroom. She avoided looking at the mirror, knowing what she might see if she did. But even as she tried to push the fear aside, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was already there, waiting for her to make a mistake, to let her guard down. She knew it was only a matter of time before he made his next move. She reached for the light switch, her fingers trembling as she flipped it on. The room was bathed in a harsh, sterile glow, but even the light couldn't chase away the darkness she felt creeping in around her. Amanda glanced at the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, there was nothing. Just her reflection, staring back at her, exhausted and afraid. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. The shadow. The smile. She didn't scream. There was no point. She had known all along that this moment would come. The man in the mirror was still there, still waiting. And now, she was out of time.